London, a city that pulses with life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a place where history and modernity collide, where every corner is steeped in stories both grand and grim. Amid the hustle and bustle, beneath the surface of this vibrant metropolis lies a darker reality, a world where the unthinkable can happen in the blink of an eye. But even in the face of horror, there are those who dedicate their lives to uncovering the truth, no matter how elusive. This is the world of New Scotland Yard. Synonymous with excellence in crime solving, New Scotland Yard has earned its place as a global leader in criminal investigation. For decades, its detectives have been at the forefront of some of the most challenging and high-profile cases in history. These seasoned investigators are relentless, meticulously piecing together fragments of evidence to expose the truth. In a city as vast and complex as London, their work is never done, and their resolve never wavers. On the morning of Saturday, January 13, 2007, Cathy Marlow, a 28-year-old professional from New Zealand, started her day like any other. Freshly returned from an adventurous holiday in Egypt, she was ready to dive back into her work at Research Now, a company located near the iconic Oval Cricket Ground in South London. For Cathy, London was more than just a place to work. It was a city of opportunity where she could grow both personally and professionally. Little did she know this ordinary Saturday would mark the last chapter of her life.
Little did I know this ordinary Saturday would mark the last chapter of my life.
Unable to reach her, one of Cathy's flatmates called a mutual friend who worked in the same building, asking him to check on her.
I was getting really worried. She wasn't answering her phone or texts, so I asked our friend to see if she was at work.
What he discovered upon entering the office would forever alter the lives of those who knew Cathy.
I walked into the office and everything seemed normal at first, but then, there she was, in the ground floor shower room.
There, in a ground floor shower room, he found her, lifeless, surrounded by a pool of blood. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare.
I couldn't believe it. It was like a scene from a horror movie.
The scene was chaotic, blood smeared across walls, splattered on the floor.
It was immediately clear that Cathy had fought desperately for her life, engaging in a violent struggle with her attacker. But despite her efforts, she had been overpowered.
Cathy Marlow's body was found in the shower, her neck cruelly bound by a pink fluffy scarf, an item that was once a comforting gift from her mother, now twisted into a tool of murder. The brutality of the act was evident, but it was the use of Cathy's own scarf that added a layer of chilling personal cruelty to the crime.
The scene spoke volumes. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was deeply personal.
The detectives quickly realized that this was no ordinary crime. It wasn't just a murder, it was a savage, personal attack.
But who could have harbored such hatred towards Cathy? It was the question that haunted us from the very beginning.
The initial lack of suspects and apparent motive made the case all the more perplexing. We had to dig deeper, look into every aspect of her life.
The investigation was just beginning, and the detectives knew they were in for a challenging journey to uncover the truth.
Cathy Marlow was the embodiment of youthful ambition. Described by friends as outgoing, warm, and full of life, she had left her home in New Zealand to carve out a future in London, a city she had always dreamed of living in. For Cathy, London represented endless possibilities, a place where she could explore her passions and build a successful career.
But now, all of that potential, all of those dreams, had been brutally extinguished. Her friends and family were left in shock, grappling with the sudden and violent loss of someone so dear to them. Cathy's family, still in New Zealand, faced an unbearable grief compounded by distance. Her mother, already battling terminal cancer, now had to endure the unimaginable pain of losing her daughter in such a horrific manner, thousands of miles from home. Back at the crime scene, the investigation was ramping up. With no immediate suspects and scant initial evidence, Detective Elaine and his team knew they were in for a long, painstaking process. The building, which housed multiple offices across 3 floors, now became the focus of one of the most extensive forensic examinations New Scotland Yard had ever undertaken. Over 100 forensic experts were brought in, each specializing in different aspects of crime scene analysis. They meticulously combed through every inch of the building, collecting fingerprints, analyzing blood patterns and searching for any trace of the killer. Every detail, no matter how small, was scrutinized. The building was sealed off, with strict measures in place to preserve the integrity of the crime scene. S3, we knew that the crime scene would be our primary source of evidence. The challenge was enormous. We had to ensure that we didn't miss a single clue. The sheer scale of the scene, combined with the complexity of the attack, meant that this would be one of the most demanding investigations we'd ever faced. One of the key tasks was to piece together the sequence of events. What had happened in those final, terrifying moments of Cathy's life? The blood spatter pattern suggested a prolonged struggle, indicating that Cathy had fought hard against her attacker. The forensic team also discovered traces of bleach, a sign that the killer had attempted to clean up after the crime, but the attempt was futile. The evidence of the violence was too widespread to erase. As the forensic team continued their work, another critical aspect of the investigation began: reviewing CCTV footage from the surrounding area. London, known for its extensive surveillance network, offered thousands of hours of footage that could potentially hold the key to identifying Cathy's killer. But without a clear idea of who they were looking for, the task was daunting.
With no witnesses and no immediate suspects, the CCTV footage was both a blessing and a curse. It was a massive haystack, and we were searching for a needle without knowing what that needle looked like.
Despite these challenges, Detective Elaine and his team pressed on, developing theories and narrowing down their search. They knew that somewhere within the vast amounts of data and evidence lay the clues that would lead them to the truth. The investigation was a race against time, not only to bring justice for Cathy but also to prevent the killer from striking again. As the days passed and the investigation intensified, the police turned to the public for help. They needed witnesses, anyone who might have seen something suspicious in the area on the day of the murder. But asking Cathy's family to make a public appeal was a heart-wrenching decision. Grieving and devastated, they had to gather the strength to speak out, hoping that their plea would resonate with someone who had crucial information.
If anyone knows anything, no matter how small, please come forward. We just want justice for Cathy. She was a beautiful soul, and we cannot rest until we know who did this to her.
The appeal was broadcast across the nation, touching the hearts of many. But the response was slow. People were frightened, uncertain, and the lack of immediate leads left the investigation hanging in the balance. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on the New Scotland Yard team mounted, but they refused to give up. Their persistence finally paid off when a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: analyzing fibers found at the crime scene. A single out-of-place fiber led them to a potential suspect, someone who had been off their radar until now.
That fiber was the first real lead we had. It was something concrete, something we could follow up on. From there, everything began to fall into place.
The suspect, a colleague of Cathy's, had a history of erratic behavior that had gone unnoticed. The fiber matched clothing found in his home, and further investigation revealed inconsistencies in his alibi. When confronted with the evidence, he broke down, confessing to the crime in a shocking and twisted revelation.
She just wouldn't stop. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. But it just happened. I couldn't control it.
The confession sent shockwaves through Cathy's friends, family, and colleagues. The idea that someone she worked with, someone she trusted, could be capable of such brutality was almost too much to bear. But the truth was out, and justice was finally within reach. Cathy Marlow's murder was a crime that shocked a city and devastated a family. But thanks to the tireless efforts of Detective Damien Elaine and his team, her killer was brought to justice. The investigation was a testament to the dedication, skill, and determination of New Scotland Yard's detectives, who refused to let this heinous crime go unsolved.
And this case will stay with me forever. It was one of the hardest I've ever worked on, but it was also one of the most important. We owed it to Cathy and to her family to find the truth, and that's what we did.
In the end, the case of Cathy Marlow serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. But it also stands as a testament to the power of justice and the unbreakable resolve of those who seek it. New Scotland Yard's work is never done, but as long as there are crimes to solve, they will continue to fight for those who can no longer fight for themselves. This has been the story of how one of London's most notorious murders was solved. Join us next time as we delve into another gripping case in the New Scotland Yard files. One of the first steps in the investigation was to examine the people who worked at Research Now, the company where Cathy was employed. The building housed over 100 employees, all of whom needed to be questioned. Forensic samples were taken from the premises, and the whereabouts and alibis of every person in the building were meticulously recorded. The police were particularly interested in anyone who might have been in the office on the day of the murder, as it was a Saturday, a time when the building would usually be empty. Among those questioned, one man quickly became a person of interest, the individual who had discovered Cathy's body. This man was a colleague and friend of Cathy's who had been contacted by her flatmate when Cathy failed to show up for lunch as planned. He claimed to have walked to the office where he stumbled upon the horrific scene. Despite his account, his behavior raised suspicions. He was described as overly helpful, which, in the eyes of the investigating officers, could indicate a guilty conscience or an attempt to manipulate the investigation. Detective Damien Elaine, the senior officer in charge, faced a critical decision. Should they treat this man as a suspect, or as a concerned friend who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Elaine, relying on his years of experience, had a gut feeling that the murder was the work of an intruder rather than someone who knew Cathy. The scene suggested a chaotic, opportunistic crime, not a premeditated act of violence. Cathy's presence in the office on a Saturday was unusual, leading Elaine to hypothesize that she had interrupted a burglary in progress. As the investigation continued, the team made a significant discovery. A number of laptops were missing from the office. This suggested a possible motive theft. The idea that Cathy had been killed because she stumbled upon a burglar in the act began to take shape. The brutality of the crime, however, indicated that the person responsible was not just a common thief. This was someone willing to go to extreme lengths, including murder, to avoid being caught. The case took another twist when detectives realized that Cathy's handbag was missing from the crime scene. This small detail would prove crucial. Cathy's handbag was not just a personal item, it was a potential source of evidence. If the handbag was in the possession of the killer, it could contain traces of DNA, fingerprints, or other clues that would lead directly to him. The search for the handbag led detectives to a petty thief named Daniel Kennedy. Kennedy had a history of minor crimes and had been arrested after attempting to use Cathy's bank card. When questioned, he claimed to have found the handbag on the street and denied any involvement in the murder. His story seemed plausible, especially given his record of petty theft rather than violent crime. Despite initial suspicions, Kennedy was eventually cleared of involvement in Cathy's death, but his possession of the handbag added another layer of complexity to the case. With Kennedy ruled out, the focus shifted back to the forensic evidence. The investigation reached a critical point when DNA samples recovered from under Cathy's fingernails provided a match. The DNA belonged to a man named Matthew Fagan, a former employee of Research Now. Fagan had been fired from the company 6 months earlier due to reliability issues. His connection to the crime scene, combined with the DNA evidence, made him the prime suspect. Fagan, however, denied any involvement in Cathy's murder. He claimed to have been in a different part of London on the day of the crime and even provided an alibi, stating that he had been mugged and treated for injuries at a hospital. Despite his denials, detectives were able to place him near the crime scene at the time of the murder, thanks to CCTV footage. This footage, though not entirely clear, showed a man resembling Fagan walking towards the Research Now office shortly before the time of the murder and later leaving with a backpack that appeared to be full. Further analysis by a forensic podiatrist who specialized in identifying individuals based on their gait confirmed that the man in the footage was indeed Fagan. With this evidence in hand, the detectives were convinced that Fagan was responsible for Cathy's death. They believed that he had returned to his former workplace to steal laptops, and that Cathy had unfortunately crossed his path. In the ensuing struggle, Fagan brutally attacked Cathy, leaving her with severe head injuries before strangling her with her own scarf. After the murder, he attempted to clean up the crime scene and stole the laptops, all while carrying out his plan with a cold and calculated demeanor. However, one lingering question remained. What could have driven Fagan to commit such a violent act? The detectives were puzzled by the sheer brutality of the crime. Was it simply desperation, or was there something deeper at play? Fagan's lack of a criminal record for violent offenses made the situation even more perplexing. The case of Matthew Fagan and the murder of Cathy Marlow, a forensic triumph in modern criminal investigation. When Matthew Fagan was dismissed from his job and declared bankrupt, it set off a series of events that would culminate in tragedy. Here was a man who felt profoundly wronged by life, someone whose pride and sense of self-worth had been thoroughly dismantled. Stripped of his dignity and facing financial ruin, Fagan was pushed to the brink of desperation. His response to these overwhelming pressures would lead him down a dark path, resulting in a brutal and senseless crime. The investigation into Cathy Marlow's murder began with Fagan as the prime suspect. From the outset, the police were convinced of his involvement, but the motive appeared trivial, just a few stolen laptops. This wasn't a case of someone killing for vast riches or in a moment of passionate rage. Instead, it was a crime seemingly born out of sheer desperation and anger. Despite the growing body of evidence against him, Fagan adamantly denied any involvement, forcing the detectives to meticulously piece together a case that would stand up in court. The role of forensics in this investigation cannot be overstated. It was the forensic team that provided the critical breakthroughs needed to tie Fagan to the crime. They found his blood, his DNA, on the underside of the desks from which the laptops had been stolen. This blood was likely the result of a head injury Fagan sustained during a struggle with Cathy, perhaps when she stumbled upon him in the act of stealing the laptops. This discovery was a significant piece of the puzzle, helping to place Fagan at the scene and linking him directly to the violent encounter. As the evidence mounted, Fagan's story began to change. He admitted to breaking into the office with the intent to steal laptops, but claimed he wasn't alone. In a desperate bid to deflect blame, he insisted that one of his accomplices must have been responsible for Cathy's murder. This shifting narrative was nothing more than an attempt to evade responsibility and paint himself as a victim of circumstance, rather than the instigator of a horrific crime. From a psychological perspective, Fagan was a man who felt deeply victimized by life. His violent actions, which left him with head injuries, provided him with an opportunity to recast himself as the wronged party. In his mind, he was the victim of life's injustices, a man who had been unfairly sacked, driven to bankruptcy, and now wrongfully accused of murder. This skewed perspective allowed him to blame anyone and anything for his suffering, while refusing to acknowledge his own culpability in the events that had unfolded. Despite Fagan's attempts to mislead the police, the truth gradually came to light. He initially claimed he wasn't at the scene of the crime, asserting that he was in the hospital, being treated for head injuries sustained during a mugging. He then denied being the individual captured on CCTV outside the office. As the investigation progressed, he revised his story again, admitting to the burglary but placing the blame for Cathy's murder on others. But the forensic evidence continued to pile up, systematically dismantling each of his claims. Forensics played a crucial role in countering Fagan's ever-changing narrative. DNA evidence found under Cathy's fingernails matched Fagan's profile, as did the blood discovered under the desk. These findings, combined with the fact that laptops were missing from the office, painted an increasingly clear picture of Fagan's involvement in the crime. In the end, the detectives pieced together a narrative that combined opportunity, desperation, and a willingness to kill to avoid being caught. Fagan was a man with little to lose, a disgruntled former employee who had crossed the line from petty theft to murder when confronted by Cathy. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the forensic work done by the team at New Scotland Yard was instrumental in securing a conviction. The case of Cathy Marlow's murder is a stark reminder of the dangers that can arise in the most unexpected of circumstances. It also highlights the dedication and persistence required to solve such a complex crime. Through meticulous forensic analysis, the careful examination of CCTV footage, and the tireless efforts of the investigators, justice was ultimately served. Fagan was convicted and sentenced, bringing some measure of closure to Cathy's family and friends, though the tragic loss of a young life remains an indelible scar on all who knew her. Senior Detective Damian Elaine and his team were relentless in their pursuit of justice. They knew that to ensure Fagan would not escape conviction, they needed to leave no stone unturned. They immersed themselves in the case, living and breathing it daily, always searching for that one piece of evidence that would conclusively link Fagan to the murder. Their persistence paid off when they found a tiny piece of flesh with a hair attached, stuck to the wall where the struggle had taken place. The DNA from the hair was a match for Fagan, further solidifying the case against him and making it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his innocence. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, Fagan continued to deny his involvement. He stuck to his story of being accompanied by others during the burglary, insisting that they must have been responsible for Cathy's death. But the police were determined to find more proof. They eventually tracked down the stolen laptops, thanks to a tip from an individual who had purchased them from Fagan. This discovery not only confirmed Fagan as the thief, but also placed him at the scene during the critical moments leading up to Cathy's death. One final piece of evidence came from Cathy's handbag, which had been stolen during the crime and later recovered by the police. Testing revealed Fagan's DNA and fingerprints on various items inside the bag, including personal effects like cosmetic items. This finding tied him directly to Cathy at the time of her murder, leaving little doubt about his guilt. What made this case particularly disturbing was that Fagan wasn't a hardened criminal or a psychopath. Until his life began to unravel, he had been an ordinary person, but when faced with the loss of his job, financial ruin, and a bruised ego, he became capable of committing a crime that was as brutal as it was senseless. This realization was deeply unsettling, as it suggested that under the right circumstances, almost anyone could be driven to such extremes. The prosecution faced the daunting task of convincing the jury that Fagan, despite his persistent denials, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Fagan, confident in his ability to outsmart the system, decided to take the stand in his own defense. He maintained his innocence, presenting himself as a victim of circumstance and spinning a story that painted him as someone who had been wronged at every turn. But the prosecution was well prepared. They systematically deconstructed his lies, exposing the inconsistencies in his story and leaving him with no credible defense. In the end, the jury saw through Fagan's facade. They found him guilty of Cathy Marlow's murder and sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. The trial was a resounding success for the detectives of New Scotland Yard, who had painstakingly pieced together the evidence to secure a conviction. Their meticulous work ensured that justice was served, even if it couldn't undo the tragedy that had occurred. For Cathy's family, who had traveled from New Zealand to attend the trial, the verdict brought a measure of closure. Yet, as Cathy's father poignantly noted, no conviction could bring his daughter back or erase the pain and suffering caused by Fagan's actions. The loss of Cathy was a wound that would never fully heal, a tragic reminder of the senseless violence that had claimed her life. Ultimately, Cathy Marlow's death was not about her at all. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, an innocent bystander who crossed paths with a man who had lost everything and was consumed by his own bitterness and rage. Her fighting spirit, her refusal to back down, may have only fueled Fagan's anger, leading to a crime that was as senseless as it was brutal. Fagan's conviction was a testament to the perseverance, dedication, and expertise of the investigative team. Their unwavering commitment to justice ensured that a dangerous man was taken off the streets, and that Cathy's family could find some solace in knowing that the person responsible for her death was held accountable. The case of Matthew Fagan and Cathy Marlow serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of unchecked anger and the importance of thorough, meticulous forensic work in the pursuit of justice.